Hello, hello. Thank you all for coming today. We're going to take just a minute or two here at the start and make sure that everyone gets in from the waiting room and give it a few minutes before we begin. But definitely want to welcome everyone to this new town hall series. Um, there's so many things we're going to be talking about over the next number of weeks and months, and we're really excited that you're here today. Feel free to say hi in the chat, like I see a few of you have already, and we are definitely looking forward to getting started because there's a lot to talk about. We are in a time and a moment of great transition. And the last time I started town halls like that, we were talking during the pandemic, right? And these types of engagements with the community and with the membership are something that I think ASMP is uniquely suited to do. So we're really happy to be here today, and hopefully we have a lot of interesting information. As I mentioned, if you're just coming in right now, we're going to wait another minute or two, let people filter in before we get started. I will say off the top that in the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. And today, for everything we talk about, it is going to generate questions. We have questions that you submitted when you made your registration, which we already have here with us. But questions that come up today, please do put them in the Q&A box. The only thing I can guarantee today is that we will not have time to cover everything for sure, which is why we're going to be having these very regularly, as we will talk about soon. So good to see everyone in the chat and all the different places that you're from. We got a lot of exciting news, a lot of exciting things that are happening, and a lot of stuff to talk about. So let's see here. I want to make sure before we officially get going that everything's in the right place. Everything's looking good and sounding good, and hopefully you can hear me. We will get started in just a moment. All right. So, and thank you all. I already see some questions being added, which we really do appreciate, because that is what this is about more than anything else. It's about answering questions. We really want to be able to have these days and these times be a forum where you all can ask questions that affect you and your careers and your livelihoods and the things that you're passionate about. And either we're going to have some answers or we're going to go out and get some answers for you, which is something that we commit to. And so good to see everyone. So let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Thomas Maddrey. I'm the CEO of ASMP, the American Society of Media Photographers. And before becoming the CEO, I was the chief legal officer for ASMP. I'm an attorney by trade. I came to that profession after spending about a decade as a professional photographer. That was my first job and my first career and my first love and passion. I joined ASMP when I was in 11th grade myself, after hearing from my high school photography teacher about ASMP. And so ASMP has had a big role in my life for many, many years. And I'm really happy and excited to be leading this organization along with our COO, Melanie Porter, and our wonderful board of directors, as we step into so many things that are going on right now. One question that I already saw come in that I want to talk about right at the top is that, yes, this will be recorded. It will be on ASMP and NAMPA YouTube channels. It will be on the ASMP website, and you'll also see clips of it, assuming that I managed to say anything of interest. We will put clips of it on various social media platforms. We definitely want it to be a repository that you can refer to and learn from as we continue forward. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and talk about what we're doing today and what the outline is. All right. And hopefully you can see that. Actually, let me switch this here so that it makes more sense. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. And everything is looking good there. If it's not, just let me know in the chat, because we have lots of different stuff that we're going to talk about today. This is a collaboration that we are very happy to be doing with PetaPixel. And PetaPixel, and we are happy to have Jaron Schneider here today, PetaPixel's editor-in-chief, who's going to come on in a few minutes as we start talking about some various details about all of these topics. And so we're certainly happy to have them today. So we want to thank PetaPixel for their involvement and their support of ASMP for many years. Had a really great relationship and do have a really great relationship with Jaron and the team over at PetaPixel, some of which we're going to talk about. Some we're going to talk about here today. All right, perfect. So I want to start by saying Happy Earth Day to everyone. And it is Earth Day, and this image here was the most recent Best in Show winning image from Michelle Valberg in the NAMPA Showcase 2026 competition that closed and was announced right at the end of last year. It's been a great relationship between ASMP and NAMPA. If you're not familiar with NAMPA, they're the North American Nature Photography Association. And NAMPA is such a wonderful addition to the membership and the team over here at ASMP, and wanted to take a minute at this top to celebrate Earth Day and say welcome to all of our NAMPA friends here, because the topics we talk about affect all of us, right? They affect all creators, and they affect all photographers and all videographers. And so we are very happy to have everyone in this tent. So what's this all about? What are we talking about today? And why are we talking about it today? You know, when we think about putting together kind of a town hall series of this type, there are a few things that we want to make sure we're able to communicate. One, we have to make sure that we are talking about these issues in a way that has thought and meaning behind it, that we're not just throwing stuff up against the wall. We want to be able to answer real questions and provide real resources and opportunities. But this is just the beginning of the conversation. Why are we doing this now? As I mentioned, this will be on YouTube and other places, so you can refer back to it. This is only the beginning of this conversation. This conversation is going to continue, and this is a bi-weekly town hall series. So every 2 weeks, we will be having another one of these with different special guests and different topics and deeper dives into some of the areas that we're going to talk about today. Our next session will be on Wednesday, May 6th at 4 p.m. Eastern. I tell you, we're going to try to get to dial in the right exact date and time and hour, and we're going to try as much as we can to stay very close to that. It's not going to be exact every time, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why that is with some of the advocacy work that we're up to lately. But we wanted to make sure you get that on your calendar. Session info and details for that will be released soon, so be on the lookout for that. This is the start of a conversation, but good Lord, it can't be finished. We have so many things to discuss, and there's so many things that are going on, right? And so the trick here is to tee up the questions, answer what we can, do deeper dives on some things when we have the time, and then circle back around and do as much as we can every 2 weeks here as a group. Before we jump into the details, I saw a question in chat that I think is a great question. It's also one that I'm going to I'm going to put a little pin in, which is the ASMP and NAMPA YouTube channels. I'm going to link that here in the chat, and we'll include it in the email that goes out to everyone later as well. One of the things you should do when you go to that link is you should click on that very first video that you see under ASMP's 80th anniversary. And that is a session we did with Santiago Leon from the Content Authenticity Initiative, which we'll talk about today, AI, authenticity, and the future of photography. Definitely want you to take a look at that. As part of our 80th anniversary, which ASMP just celebrated, we really wanted to focus this year on education in 2 dimensions. So the first dimension is our new education partner program. That is where we are working with high schools and colleges, 2- and 4-year colleges, to help prepare and support the next generation of creators and supplement the programs that these schools have. We're going to provide them with programming, with content, with materials, and support these institutions as they train photographers. If you know a school who might be interested, please have them reach out to us. You can find all that info over at asmp.org/EPP. So please do check that out. But even more importantly is the other education initiative that we have, and that is another announcement we made as part of our 80th anniversary, free student memberships. And so for the first time, and I think it's the first of any of our peer associations as well, if you are a verifiable student anywhere in the world, you can join ASMP and get a student membership for free. This just started, literally 3 months ago, 3.5 months ago. We're really happy to say that it's now at 115 new student members who have become part of ASMP since we launched this just 3.5 months ago. They come from 21 different states and also one from Lima, Peru. That's wonderful. Melanie and I were just able to present this info to the national board the other day, and very excited about the uptake and how this project has gone. We are working very hard to bring this information and bring what we do and the professionalism and the education to students all around the world. And now any student can be a member of ASMP. So if you know a student who you think should be a member of ASMP, you can have them go to asmp.org/join and get all of the details. Okay. All right. So we're going to bring Jaron out in just a minute, but I wanted to hit 2 or 3 things as kind of a way to set the stage here for us, right? Way to set the stage, because we do have to start somewhere. I can recall very specifically a meeting that I was at a little more than 3 years ago, where it was first raised about the increase in quality and output of some of the new generative AI platforms that had been out there. This was, we're talking about the DALL-E models, and we're talking about, a ChatGPT that came around in 2022. And it was a little bit after that it was clear that this was going to be a very significant change for the industry. And since that time and through the current day, keeping track of these increases in inventions and investments has been a near impossible task. It is, as you all know, because you're living it as well, you are in the middle of a maelstrom of different things that are coming out each and every day. But at each turn as an organization, we want to focus on the things that affect photographers and videographers and what you need to be focused on when it comes to these topics. So 3 questions I want you to keep in mind as we talk today. Right. First, how does the rise in use of Gen AI tools affect the marketplace for photography? And how does this differ between disciplines? There's some parts of the industry that are somewhat insulated from some of these changes. There are other parts that are embracing it in a different kind of way. And there are some segments of photography that are going to look very, very different if they haven't already started looking very, very different than they did even 3 months, 6 months, a year ago. That's something we always want to keep in mind. Second, what are the legal implications that photographers and creatives need to have in mind as they draft agreements and write licenses and communicate with clients? we're going to dive into this when we get into questions, because I know there's a lot of questions about this type of thing. Third, how are governments and policymakers viewing these issues, and how can ASMP shape that conversation? Okay. Please keep an eye on, and advocacy is a tricky topic. We're going to talk a lot about advocacy, though, because it matters. And advocacy matters in this context and in these relationships when we're talking about AI in particular. So, with that as our framework, let's go ahead and start this conversation. The way we're going to start it, I'm very, very happy to say, is that we are going to invite onto the stage here Jaron Schneider, the editor-in-chief of PetaPixel. And so, Jaron, please come out whenever you have a moment. I'm going to get all my windows in place there. Hey, how's it going?
Hi. Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And it's now talking to everyone who's able to attend here. It's really been a pleasure and a joy to not only work with Jaron, but to watch how PetaPixel has operated in this industry, certainly at a time of incredible transition and change, as we all know that we're living in. And so we want to take this first one to do a few things, this first town hall, to do a few things. One, to say thank you to PetaPixel for being our partner on this. Even though Jaron won't be here every week or every session that we have, PetaPixel is supportive of this town hall and is going to be part of everything we do with this as we bring in different guests and have different topics all throughout the year. So, Jaron, thank you for that, and I'm really excited to have you here today.
Well, you're welcome. It's our pleasure. We see the huge value in what you guys at ASMP do, and really want to do our best to help let other people know about it as much as possible.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you. And so, Jaron, look, I think everyone who's in the industry in any capacity has certainly heard of PetaPixel, but let's take a step back, and maybe, because when you and I were speaking the other day, you were telling me a little bit about your history coming to the organization and kind of where PetaPixel has been in the last few years, and maybe you could just kind of talk about that genesis and about your part of the organization.
Sure. I started at PetaPixel in 2020. I had just gotten laid off from Digital Trends, which I had transitioned to away from the photo industry. I actually joined Digital Trends to be a AV editor. I was going to move away from photography and do something else with my journalism career. That lasted 7 months. I was immediately basically brought back into photography when an opportunity opened up at PetaPixel 2 days after I lost my job at Digital Trends. It was a really fortuitous timing. The former editor of PetaPixel, DL Cade, decided he wanted to go back to school and finish his doctorate. He's a very smart person, way smarter than me. He's like now doing like science on like vision, on like how vision works, and it's like that's the best way I can describe it. And I'm sure it's a terrible description because I can't understand what he says when he describes things to me. But since then, when I came on to PetaPixel, I sort of made it clear that it was my goal to not just continue doing what it had been doing. I wanted it to be more than that. I saw the potential of PetaPixel as not just a blog, but as a real publication doing advocacy for photographers through its coverage. So not only were we going to provide information to our readership, we wanted to make sure that our readers felt heard through the topics that we cover. And that has been a driving force for the entire time. I also got real lucky when Chris Nichols and Jordan Drake got laid off from Amazon, where they were when DP Review was still owned by Amazon. And I scooped them up immediately to try and do a better job on the multimedia end. So my focus for the last 2 or 3 years has been multimedia, as well as making sure that the website's content maintains its quality. And we've grown significantly over this time. Like we used to be 2 employees. It was DL and the owner, Michael. And now we've quadrupled that, work with contracted writers and have multiple full-time editors. So all in service of the goal that I said before, is just doing the most we can for the industry and the photographer.
Well, And when we were talking the other day, you mentioned a phrase that I wanted to dig in a little on, because it goes to kind of what you publish and what kind of angles you take. And that's, is it on your beat? What's your responsibility? Where do you, how does the framework of determining what to cover as an organization, as a media organization, certainly that is industry specific, how do you make those decisions?
It used to be we'd just sit in like a Slack chat and be like, should we cover this? Is this like a thing people will care about? And that was back when there were a few of us. Now that there's more of us, we have every morning we meet. Well, my morning, our UK editor, it's his afternoon. But we talk about exactly what we plan to cover and why. And in those meetings, we're like, that some people who read the website might not be interested in this topic at all. We like, should we cover X story? And we'll all listen to the person who is advocating our coverage of that. And essentially, it's like, if you think there is a portion of our audience that would benefit from this coverage, or if you think down the line we're going to want to point back to this news story at some point, then we're good with it. And that sort of mentality has kind of broadened how much stuff we'll cover. And so you'll see over the last few years, we do a lot more culture and a lot of like pop culture stuff, which we wouldn't have really touched back in the 2010s, but it has become more important. And I'm glad that we sort of broadened our scope, because all of that sort of plays into this, the technology and visuals and photography all sort of play on one another. And staying informed about what's going on, even on the edges, the periphery of a photographer's vision, is still, I think, really important. So even if you just read a headline and you move on, at least some part of you registered that that happened, and maybe that will be
Mhm.
valuable in the future.
And so, I think one question that and I see it actually just popped up in the Q&A a minute ago, which is, just starting from scratch. So you have those meetings. How do you find those stories? How do you know? Do you want people to be sending you info? Are you reaching? I mean, how does this work?
It's funny. It's a mix of things. So like when I first came on at PetaPixel, I had like this RSS document put together by Mike and DL as like, here's where we kind of comb, and then he's like, the ones that aren't on here, here's a list of bookmarked websites also that are like covering some fringe things that are worth looking into. And then on top of that, we also do get tips quite a bit. Our readership does send us stuff. If you see any like guest articles, stuff from like someone who's not a full-time staff writer on our masthead, those are typically someone just comes up with like, hey, I wrote this. I'm looking for someone somewhere to publish it. Sometimes we will contract out stories. They'll pitch us like, hey, I'd love to do this story. Do you have the budget to cover this? And then we'll go in the budget meeting and decide, do we have the budget for that, cover that sort of thing. But we are paying attention in our broad way to a bunch of news sources in addition to being our own news source. So yeah, we do cover things that other people cover, but we also have our ways of finding out, finger on the pulse of the industry. I have a lot of insight from folks that I don't call them out. We have people who are across the industry who keep us informed, and so like we're well connected, but
Yeah.
really it's just a matter of paying attention.
Well, I think, one of the things I think about when, I knew we were going to have this conversation is that there are few places in the industry that have such a broad view of like everything that's going on, from the cultural to the legal to the business to the professional side and the technical side and the hardware and the software. But before we jump into AI, what has been going on in the last 18 months, let's say, that you think are trends that photographers need to be aware of? Obviously, we're going to talk about AI a fair bit in a minute here.
Well, there's one that I'm sure all of you all listening are painfully aware of, and it's pricing. Uh, it was already felt, this idea that photography had become expensive as both a hobby and a profession. We recently did a podcast actually on this where we just looked at the cost of things and covered for inflation. And actually, hardware hadn't gotten that much more expensive, if at all. But what has changed since we did that show is that, unfortunately, it is related to AI. The flash shortage has made it so that everything got more expensive, and that's just not just memory cards, which have tripled or quadrupled in price. but storage on computers. The actual processors in computers, like for example, like GoPro, 2 weeks ago announced a new camera. We only got pricing a couple days ago because the processors inside the GoPro that don't even do any storage, they're just processing the information, that increased in price. And they were juggling how much they needed to adjust their final pricing based on how much they could purchase. So, like, right now, the trend is effectively kind of like hold on to what you got until we get through this, because AI is sucking up all of the resources in the
Yeah.
room, and it's going to be
Yeah.
a couple of years before we see this relieved.
Well, you mentioned something there that I think is something we all could have anticipated had we actually thought about it, but I don't think very many of us thought about it to begin with. And this goes back to conversations we're having at ASMP with many of our partners, our member benefit providers, the large manufacturers, who had a lot of uncertainty in the last few years about things like tariffs and other geopolitical issues. I mean, are you seeing that having an effect on the industry across the board?
The tariff thing was rough. We watched and spoke with every manufacturer like during this phase, like what's happening. We want to make sure people know if stuff's going to increase in price and what's going to happen after. We're still kind of in that after mode now, because now that they've been ruled illegal, like we're supposed to get refunded. The camera companies likely will be, but like, will the photographers ever see any of that? I don't
Right.
know. And a lot of them ate a lot of those costs for a while before they increased prices. So it's not like they immediately tried to pass on that burden. But what's worth mentioning, and it's related to this, is that even before all of these pricing increases, either from tariffs or from shortages, the margins on cameras and lenses is better, cameras specifically, were just razor thin. So like when they were making a product, they had the final price already in mind, specced out, and that allowed them to cover the costs and make their modest profits so that they can, appease their shareholders whenever needed. Like that's was so thin. And any changes to the supply chain have resulted in like that getting dramatically upset. So there wasn't really a way for many companies to eat the cost. There was one company that only increased their prices one time, despite the tariffs increasing 2 times, and that was Sigma. And that was because they decided to eat the cost of the second increase only because they're a private company and they didn't really have shareholders to appease. So the owner of the company can say, like, we just don't want to do that. We'll eat that cost. But most companies can't do that. They have boards that they have to answer to. So, and this kind of ties into the other thing too. One of the trends that I think some folks may be noticing is that new cameras are not coming out with like, holy crap, features like with the frequency they did through the 2010s. I think Sony in particular set an unreasonable standard for innovation. The A7 II through the A7 IV period, like that section of time, like we were seeing leaps and bounds better performance and technology in those cameras. And since then, it's sort of like kind of flattened a bit. They're still better, but they're not jumping like they were. And I think that is a mix of them looking at the cost of production and trying to get their money back. And Sony in particular, they didn't do what, for example, Canon did, where they make their money back on lenses because they control a closed mount. Sony's mount is open, so they can't rely on selling lenses to cover the cost of the bodies. So you have to look at it from that perspective. So how, like, when they put so much technology and money into a camera body, like that costs them, and they really have to plan ahead. The A1 Mark II, for example, when that first came out, was significantly cheaper than it is now, because just the cost of those components just went way up. And there was nowhere for them in their business to make up that cost. So a camera that was like, I think it was around 5,000 when it came out, is now like close to 7,000, 8,000, depends on where you get it. And the quantity of them in the market is so low, like there's just not a lot of them. So I think one of the trends that photographers should expect is not to be blown away every generation. Think of it the same way we look at smartphones. Like if you upgrade it every year on the iPhone, you're not really going to feel the innovation. But if you upgrade every 3 models, oh,
Right.
that's a huge jump.
That's a big jump. Right. Right. That's a really interesting point, and I think valuable for photographers to keep in mind as they're thinking about equipment purchases and planning out, budgets and things as they move forward. But because we don't have as much time as I would like for us to sit here and talk about the million questions that I have, let's turn to AI. I mean, look, as the media organization in this industry, you have, I mean, I've got to read the excellent articles, over the last few years, chronicling kind of many of these tentacles and aspects of how generative AI has impacted professional photography. And so, what are just some of the high level, trends and takeaways that you've seen here, that we can dig into a little more?
Oh man, so it's 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 been tough. So like the cheapest among us have seen it forced into workflows more than I think it was ready to for. And when I say the cheapest among us, it's those who like to increase that profit line as much as possible. So big companies love
Mhm.
shoving AI into something as much as possible, either to have a shiny thing to point to or to replace something that was more expensive. And I think we've largely seen that not work. And I'm glad for that. I think there's a place for certain types of AI, but generative AI in particular is the most troubling for photographers. And it did a couple of things. And I hope this answers the question. If it doesn't, ask me again. Um, One of the things that we saw, and you mentioned C2PA earlier in your intro, they sort of pivoted on what their goals were right when generative AI was taking off. Like C2PA's original goal was just so that people knew that if a photo was taken in a specific place and wasn't altered beyond it with like Photoshop or whatever, and if it was, you could see it. They never talked about AI until it started to become like, oh, this is a problem. And they pivoted to be more like, not only can you do that first thing, but you can also make sure that it isn't AI. As long as it's been verified or whatever, you can tell that it's real. And I think that was an interesting choice. I'm not sure if it was the right one. And I say that because I think C2PA needed to get itself in with cameras and be fully accepted there before it tried to do something else. And
Right.
so I think that the trend I'm seeing is that AI is forcing both companies, organizations, and photographers to react faster than they really should. It was moving so quickly that everyone tried to both jump onto it and react to that faster than I think they had enough information to do so intelligently. And that is a problem with a lot of these like big pieces of technology that touch everyone's lives. Is these days it happens too fast, and the result of that is that it is largely unhelpful for many people. AI is still helpful for some, but the companies that like demand you use it because they invested in it, I feel like that's a bad way to use a technology. It's like force people
Yeah.
to use something because it doesn't come naturally to them. Why don't you wait for it to come naturally and then integrate it as it does? It just
Or
felt
solving a problem versus, finding
yeah,
the solution first
correct.
kind of
It just
situation.
felt wrong, and that's the kind of cascaded through this whole industry. Um, and as far as like industry players, like hardware and software, like in photography specifically, we're seeing AI crammed into things well before it's ready. Um, like there have been AI tools in editing software that got rolled out and they were bad. Like, like there's no other way to describe them other than terrible. Like the results were not good, but they would put them in there just to have them in there. And it took months to get them to a point where they're even somewhat useful. And now, like I'll look at Adobe, for example, them adding AI, generative AI into stuff. They've made it actually good after months of it being truly atrocious. And the way they did that is not only improving their algorithms, which they sometimes step back on when they do a new version. It sometimes gets worse before it gets better each time. You kind of step back and then two forward. Now the best uses of generative AI in Adobe are just like removals and expansions. So like if you need to move something, I use it, for example, in thumbnail creation on YouTube, where you want to kind of adjust something so that it's more enticing to the eye. So if I have someone holding an item, when you take the picture, the item might be actually too small in the frame. So I need to enlarge the item, but I don't want to enlarge the person behind it. So
Right.
I will take just the item and make it larger. But that used to take forever because I would have to hand stitch around this and then expand it. And then also
Right.
on the background, remove this in a way that didn't look like a bunch of smudges. AI has
Right.
been very good at doing that. That's the only way, to answer a question here, Mark, the only way we use AI at PetaPixel is the generative tools like remove, expand. And I actually prefer content aware, which isn't using Adobe's Firefly. It's using the older one, Sensei, which I still like. I like Sensei quite a bit. But we don't use AI in any of our editorial work. We don't allow our team to use it for articles. We don't allow them to use it for images in any way. So, like, to answer a bunch of these questions, kind of cramming them together, that's where the trend had gone, is like try and do as much as possible. But now, like,
Right.
it's the actual useful part is just a small sliver of that.
I you mentioned something, in
I was
response
all
to
over the
Mark's
place.
question. No. This is absolutely fun. You mentioned something in response to Mark's question about, these are the policies related to AI use at PetaPixel, and I think that brings up one of those core elements that I was kind of referencing earlier, which is that there are some areas of photography where AI really doesn't have a reasonable place. It doesn't have a foothold, nor should it. And we talk a lot with our friends over at NPPA and the photojournalist about these issues, right? Photojournalism is something that's very critical when we're thinking about the influence of something like generative AI. It just doesn't have a place there. Now at ASMP, many of our members are finding new and creative ways to incorporate generative AI into their workflows, whether that's for storyboarding or other parts of the pre-production or post-production process. And we're going to talk after our conversation, Jared. One of the things that we're going to close with today is talking about the copyright implications of some of these things, when it comes to generative AI and what's actually protected and what's not protected. But do you have a sense, based on what you've been seeing, about different areas of the industry that are going to be, more greatly affected by the advent of generative AI technologies than others?
Yeah, and it's actually affecting the parts of the industry that have been kind of on the down slope for a while now. There was a brief period, there's like a whisper of time, where stock photography was like a real job. And that one, I think, is the first one that got hit. And luckily, there has been some pushback on, like, when some company decides to generate a billboard using AI as opposed to getting a picture taken. Um, Most humans immediately push back. They're like, "That's gross," and they don't like it. Even as AI gets better, it's still like, why would you just not get a real human to do that? The other ones is that kind of fits in the same vein as advertising photography and advertising videography. A lot of companies are big companies like Coca-Cola, and
Mhm.
I think another one is like Dodge, and then of course there's Kalshi. They will do all AI, and they'll just put that slop on a commercial and thumbs up. And I think that says a lot about the company's values. And hopefully, if the response from the audience is negative, they go back to doing what they should be doing, which is using human artists. Or if they don't, whatever, more whatever I suppose the market will decide how that goes. But people can
Right.
form their own opinions about it, and I think largely it's been negative. One thing I do want to mention that sort of ties in to what you asked before about AI in the industry is with specifically cameras. I didn't talk about cameras; I just talked about software. Before generative AI really became like the big major topic, photographers may remember that Sony had been saying stuff about AI for years. Like, they're like, "Hey, we use AI in our autofocus," and actually, nobody had any problem with that. It's only become kind of a gross word because of generative AI. But those companies have been using some types of deep learning AI, that type of stuff in their cameras for a while, and I think most of us are okay with that. I think most of us see the idea of it understanding what it's looking at for better performance as a photographer. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So that's where I think there's value in this, but that's not really generative. And I recently asked every executive at every camera company if they thought generative AI belonged in photography, and every single one of them said no. So as far as where the industry is, the software companies might be immediately trying to jump in on it. But luckily, like the slow pacing of Japanese business has actually paid off here, and they didn't immediately just try to do that. And I do
Right.
think that they've sat back and watched long enough to know that's not the path to take. And I was very, very happy to hear that from them, that they are still like, at this time, no. Now they'll always say that. They'll always say at this time, but like the sense is, I don't think that they see that as beneficial to their business.
Right. Right. Well, I absolutely agree with you and some of your, assertions certainly as to the different areas of photography that, that are being more affected than others. And I think what this comes down to, and this is something we try to talk about a lot with our membership, is that now more than ever, this is another period of time where client education and bringing something to the table that lets your clients know that you understand this new landscape. They've heard about these things, on blogs and the news and everything else. But if you can come in and position yourself as an expert in some of these areas, you gain credibility that goes beyond the quality of the images that you take. And I think that kind of client development and that kind of client education is going to be core to photographers that are in certain areas of the industry, continuing to thrive as technology changes in ways around them. And I think it's also fair to say, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Sharon, that you know I mentioned at the beginning, the first time we really started digging in on this in terms of understanding the implications on the industry as a whole was only a few years ago, right? Only 3.5 years ago. We're still at a very rapid pace of both innovation and change here, in that when we have this conversation a year from now, we're going to be talking about entirely different things than we would today. Um, at what point do you think, are there any markers or things that we should be looking for as we move forward in kind of this generative AI world, when it comes to how this will affect photographers in the industry?
Oh gosh, that is a tough one. And I apologize. I'm a little bit distracted by a question about sound. Someone asked to make sure the volume was okay. I changed mine a little bit there, so I hope that helps. Um,
Is
and
anyone else feeling that either? Hopefully not.
it,
Hopefully
I
it all.
I think that I may have been too loud. So if not,
Oh
okay,
no.
good. Thank you, Stan.
Okay. There we
Um,
go. Of
so again, tell me if I don't answer the question.
course.
But I think that with Gen AI, we have two sides to it. On the negative side, the trust in our own eyes is being undermined, and that's bad. Obviously,
Yeah.
none of us know exactly at any point if something is real or not, and the way that social media works, it only makes that problem worse. But on the other side, I think that in the end, photography's value will be better. I think are going to see photography as more important than they did before. And we're already seeing it in analog, and how that is even more popular now than when we were talking about it having a renaissance 10 years ago.
Mm.
Um, and I think that it's the fact that you can hold your picture, the negative
Yeah.
or the positive, really resonates with people. And I think those that have grown up or are entering the workforce only seeing AI as always been there, I think they will value the real thing, the real picture more.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Does that answer the question? I hope it does. I don't know.
No, well, I probably screwed you over by asking you a question that doesn't have an answer, right? I don't have an answer to that either. But I think it gets us in the right direction, which is to say, look, I think that, you know when you talk about the value both of analog and the value of the creation of a work and having it be human generated, and ASMP is part of the various coalitions and the Human Artistry Coalition, and there are things that we as an organization really care about, and one of those is disclosure. There's it's not trying to change what the marketplace is ultimately going to do. That's an impossibility. But there is an element of advocating for, if you are going to be using something created entirely in a generative AI platform, that needs to be disclosed. That's something that we feel very strongly about. We look at Gen AI both in the input and what we very publicly call the greatest theft of intellectual property in the history of the world that took place in the last few years, when everyone's images who are on the internet in any capacity were used to train these models, these generative AI models. That's a problem. The other side of the problem is also encouraging governments and stakeholders and countries to have rules about disclosures, just like we do with organic fruits. There's a sticker that says organic. Now, the market gets to decide if they want to buy the non-organic or the organic, but at the very least, it's disclosed. That's something that I think is really, really critical to an organization like ASMP's, influence on some of these conversations, and something when we go to Washington we talk about at great length. Jaron, I just have a few more questions because I know you've been so patient to hang out with us today and talk about these issues. One, a lot of photographers, I think it's fair to say, are feeling a lot of anxiety or fear about their career and their path and everything that's going on right now. And and this is not necessarily based on your any article or thing you guys have focused on, but you've been around the industry for a very long time, and there's definitely been periods of change and ebbs and flows and ups and downs. And what would you say to photographers who are looking at this current landscape and feeling incredibly nervous about what they're seeing?
Be patient, I think, is the best advice I can give. To kind of go back to what you said about like the governments need to step in and do something to help with like making sure that there's disclosure. That ties to what I said before about when the technology rolled out, everyone was pushing it fast, right now, more, get out there. And governments, just like Japanese companies, move very slowly. And so they have not been able really to respond quite with the deftness they needed to in order to like address these real concerns. So like I understand feeling like it can be kind of hopeless right now, and it's not even like reassuring advice to say be patient. I think it'll get better, but try not to panic, because there has been a sense of that pretty early on when this got pretty good. But like I'd like to remind you that when Sora came out, that's OpenAI's video platform. Like there's text to video. Sora doesn't exist anymore, so like that should be a little bit reassuring. These products cost so much more than a human, and so the market can only bear that for so long. I think we'll see a retraction soon. I mean, I hope. I mean, just looking at the market, seeing how things are going, I think we'll see a retraction. We won't see AI go away. That, as much as many of us would like to see, like what has, like, Pandora's box was open, kind of stuff it back in there. We can only put a lot of it back. There will still be chunks of it out there. But I do think that when the dust settles, we'll get to a point where we'll feel like it's okay. We can deal with what we've got. Because as mentioned, there are uses for AI that are quite nice, as long as it's not fully replacing a human, but really just making a human's job easier. Get rid of the boring parts, get rid of the tedious parts, and let us focus on
Yeah.
the good parts. I think we're close to that.
Well, Jaron, look, I want to thank you for coming out today. I want to thank PetaPixel for helping us launch this new series. We're going to be calling on you, and hopefully you can pop back in the coming weeks and months as we talk more. And to all the attendees here and to all the members, it's it's important, and this is what we try to do in our member benefit hub and with the partnerships that we work on. You know, one of the reasons that we work with PetaPixel is because PetaPixel supports you all, and they support photography and photographers and this profession. And just like we've done in the past, the winners of Best of 2026 will find themselves on the pages of PetaPixel, and we want to thank you, Jaron, for those type of shout outs, because the membership and the industry really do benefit from having you and your team here. And so definitely want to say thank you, and thank you for spending the time today. And I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jaron. All right. All right. Well, I hope you all found that interesting. I think Jaron's a great asset to the community. You know, there's a lot of organizations out there that are in that kind of media photography space, and you know, there's a reason that we do a lot of work with PetaPixel, and they have a level of integrity and a level of care for the type of things that affect photographers and affect the membership, that we certainly appreciate. So what we want to do now is start talking a little bit more in depth about some of the topics that we raise. We have questions that y'all have asked. We're going to answer as many of those as we can. Remember that if you have a question, you can put in the Q&A box. If you put in the chat, there's like a 60% chance I'll see it. But if I don't see it, then I won't see it. So stick in the Q&A box, and then that way it's right there off to the side. I can absolutely see it as we start talking about some of these issues. You know, what we have coming up in these future installments of this town hall series are going to be on many different topics. But these first few, I think, are probably going to be AI oriented, because there's so many questions that people have. So I want to touch on some of the biggest issues, and then we're going to go into asking and answering the questions that you all have sent in and that you're sending in right now. And again, thank you for spending your time with us today. So, you know, Jaron mentioned CP2A. I was mentioning content credentials and the video that we did with Santiago Leon of the Content Authenticity Initiative. I'll go ahead and stick that specific video link in the chat that y'all can watch, and I encourage you to watch that. It's about a 90-minute conversation with the former global director of photography for the Associated Press, who is now involved with the Content Authenticity Initiative, one of whose goals is to ensure that there's a way to track and figure out what things are AI generated and what are not. There's some demos that Santiago was able to show us in that video that blew my mind. I didn't know quite that technology was at this place, and that was 6 months ago. So things have changed even a lot since then. But what we're talking about with all of these content credentials and CP2A and provenance and authenticity type groups, and this very wide range of acronyms, are things about being able to track an image to show when it's been subject to any use of generative AI and when it hasn't, and kind of having a permanent set of I mean, it's more than metadata, but you know, a permanent type of metadata that allows you to track back the history of an image so you can prove its authenticity. That's a really important piece. Now, CP2A is the coalition of companies that have agreed to put this in various hardware and software platforms. Many of the camera manufacturers have started incorporating CP2A standards into their platforms so that you can do things like have you know, content credentials and content authenticity built in from the time that you press the shutter. There are also some questions about that, which is why I think that's a good place for us to start. You know, one of the questions that was raised by this group here was, are there any efforts to have all photo editing software, Photoshop, Lightroom, Affinity, Capture One, et cetera, to embed into an image's EXIF and or metadata that the image has been AI enhanced or created, which cannot be erased? Okay, so, and I'll go ahead because I've seen I've seen this question twice, and so I will go ahead and put a link in the chat here real quick as well, which is the CP2A website, which talks about content transparency and authenticity. So here's the issue. Well, every time I say here's the issue, what you should hear in your mind is there are a million issues, but I will talk about the few that are kind of in our corner of the world, right? One of the biggest issues is that generative AI technologies have integrated themselves into almost every tool that we used to use regularly as an editing tool in any of these platforms. So when there's a question that says something to the effect of, is there a way that software companies can have a running track of every tool that uses generative AI in any capacity, that would essentially be all the tools and all the keystrokes and all the movements. And this is one of the hard dividing lines. It's one of the hard dividing lines for everyone right now, which is how much is too much, how much is not enough, at what point does something become primarily generative AI created, at what point does it not? Back when I was a photographer and we used things like the clone tool and other tools, and then when content aware fill came along, as Jaron was mentioning, those are still not using generative AI features. But now the tools, which may have the same names that they used to have a few years ago, are utilizing the backbone of generative AI features. And that changes from platform to platform. So the question is an image that has used a tool that photographers have used for decades now in Photoshop or elsewhere, which now happens to have some elements of generative AI associated with it. Does that mean this image is now an AI generated image? And again, that's an answer that's a question I don't have an answer to, right? What you can say is this, and this is where we will point to the US Copyright Office. The US Copyright Office has made very clear that there are kind of two ends of a spectrum, right? One end of the spectrum is something that is entirely human created, which has no generative AI use, that will always be eligible for copyright protection. The other end of the spectrum is something that is entirely generated by generative AI that came from a text prompt or something else. And then US Copyright Office has said that has zero copyright protection. You cannot get a copyright on something that is entirely generative AI created. When we say entirely, we often are thinking, text to image kind of generation, and where someone puts in some text phrase and out pops an image that is not eligible for copyright protection. But the question you're asking, and you should be asking, is what about everything else that's in the middle, right? What about things that have some elements of generative AI technologies? And then at what point does something switch from being protectable to not protectable? So what we generally think about when we look at both what the Copyright Office says and what technology is saying and how things are being used in the marketplace is that if something is created by a human, is not generative AI created, those elements will always be protectable. So if I have an image, and it's an architectural image, for example, and the building is an image that I took, but I decide that, the sky is not something that is very conducive to a good image. And so I let Adobe Firefly or some of the other models put in a sky. If I go to register that image with the US Copyright Office, I have to check that this is not entirely created by a human, and I disclaim the part of the image that was created using generative AI. And that means that the part of the image that is the building will be protectable by copyright, and the part of the image that is not, the sky in this example, will not be protected by copyright. That's a lot. Here's the biggest reason that that's a lot, and this will lead us into advocacy. The biggest reason that that's a lot is because photographers are able to register up to 750 images per copyright registration application. But if you have to put in any areas where you're disclaiming that a portion of the image is created using generative AI, you no longer can use that group application. You have to do those one at a time. So instead of paying $55 for 750 images to be registered, you're now paying $35 per image to be registered. That's not workable. When we go up to Washington, we talk with the copyright office just about every time we go. And this is generally the way that we start that conversation. That's not okay. There are reasons that that's not okay. One of the biggest reasons, going back to what we mentioned a second ago, is that the line between what is created using a Gen AI tool and what's not has become very blurry, very blurry. So many of the things we're going to talk about today, we have some good ideas about. This one is harder. This one is harder. When the question that was originally asked was, is there a way that software can show anytime an AI-based tool was used to enhance or change an image? The instant answer we all have in our heads is, yeah, that'd be awesome. But the second order question should be, well, how the heck are we going to determine what counts and what doesn't count there when everything is beginning to use the underpinnings of Gen AI? I don't have an answer to that yet. And the industry doesn't have an answer to that yet. But it is something to definitely keep an eye on. The reason I want to mention this, and I want to mention copyright, and I'm tying these things in together on kind of this first big question that we're talking about, has to do with you as a photographer and your clients. Because when a client hires you for whatever type of photography you do, there's a element of expectation that they own the intellectual property that's in the images that you give to them. And right now, I am 100% sure that even for the 100-something people who are here live with us right now, many of you have used tools without knowing it that have added elements into an image that you've delivered to a client that, if push came to shove, would not be considered protectable by the intellectual property laws of the US or the Copyright Office. That's a problem. That's a problem that no one's thinking about. And I'm going to give you an example. If you are a commercial photographer and you're doing advertising work, and Jaron mentioned Coke and other very large companies, that's a concern, right, for them. But I'm talking about the next tier down, the mid-sized to large companies that are paying you to come in and be a photographer. When you deliver your work to them, if it has used generative AI in certain ways and amounts and elements and all those things, you may be delivering to them a product that would not be protectable in a court of law. And the one thing we know about companies is that companies have lawyers. And the lawyers at these companies are not thinking about this because all of this is brand new. That means that you have to be thinking about it. You have to be educating yourself about this stuff. You have to be using the right information so that you can help your clients understand what they're actually getting or not getting when it comes to the work that they're doing. I talked with a member the other day at one of the legal clinics that we do on Tuesday mornings. And the member said, hey, I've worked with this client for 10 years and it's awesome. They've been a really wonderful client. They want to work with me. They continue to hire me, but they want me to start using AI-based tools in this. And I don't know what to tell them. I don't know how that affects things. And most photographers don't know how that affects things. And this is where you have to have a conversation with your client about meeting them in the middle between doing what they're asking you to do, which may be perfectly reasonable, but also understanding that if you do what they're asking you to do, they may not have the actual ownership of the images that they think they have. And if to any of you, that sounds like a lawsuit in waiting where photographers might get sued, you're not wrong. I think that's something we're going to see soon. And it's something that concerns us at ASMP quite a bit. So switching to a follow-up, which kind of goes along with that. And this was a question that was asked very early on by one of the people here. Is ASMP involved in any kind of template or something for us to try and restrict client and users from using images to train AI? I want to look at this as not just the training side, but as both on the licensing side and everything else. And the answer is yes. So at our next town hall, which will be on May 6th, we will be introducing a full set of documents in clauses that you can use in your documents. They will go into our document library. So every ASMP member and NAMPA member has access to the document library. that allows you to see 25 different lawyer crafted documents, contract templates, and talent releases, and a whole bunch of stuff in there that will be updated with AI related provisions, some of which you might want to use and some of which might not make sense for the type of work that you do. It is on you as a photographer to be able to say to yourself and to your clients, here are the rules about what you can do with my images. You absolutely can tell clients that they either can or cannot use the images you deliver to them for use in training AI models. This becomes more important right now because we're now not looking at the giant platform AI models. There are now local AI models where companies have internal. We used to, as photographers, we always would give them a library of images. They would build libraries of images internally for marketing and everything else. Those companies are taking those libraries and they're turning them into their own AI generation platforms. So the question is, are the images that you're creating for that client, are those eligible to be used for training their internal company AI models? The answer, in our view, at this moment should be no, unless that's something that you and the client have agreed to. So we do have some language that we're preparing that says, hey, these images cannot be used for future training of any generative AI models unless you license that as part of the agreement that we have in our contract. That is the same type of term that you would have in any other part of a license. In a license, we often talk about, things can only be published in North America under this license, or there's a different license for different parts of the world, or there's a different license if it's in different formats, whether that's digital or print or large scale or small scale. So this is just another term in that element. And I want you all to be thinking about AI and generative AI as parts of a license agreement, just like we treat everything else that we work on in this corner of the universe, right? Yeah, sometimes that's going to make a lot of sense. Sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense. So what do you do when, like the member I talked to the other day, a client is asking for something very specific and you are concerned about doing it for whatever reason? There's a lot of reasons that you might be concerned about it. And this is where client education is going to come into effect. And so another thing that we're writing is kind of a bullet point list of things that you should know when you're negotiating with your clients about how these images can and should be used and what's protectable and what's not. And if a client asks you to use AI in the images that you're delivering, generative AI platforms, that you know what to say to them. The answer is not no. I hope that, and for the last, many years, I hope I've been very consistent about this. And that is, it's not that things are right or wrong 100% of the time or 0% of the time. It's about, are both parties aware of what's being transferred, the value of it, and are the parties being compensated appropriately? Copyright buyouts are not inherently a bad thing. Copyright buyouts are a bad thing when they try to pay you what they should be paying for a 30-day license for a whole copyright buyout. That's when it becomes bad. You are in business. You are photographers. You are trying to keep a roof over your heads and food on the table. And the way that you do that is you enter into contracts where you get to stay in business. So this is just another element on which you can negotiate. And it's something you're going to be seeing more and more from us, both in these meetings and in the content that we put into the document library and elsewhere. To circle back to what was a very long soliloquy, and I apologize that I try not to talk for like dozens of minutes at a time, but I think that probably got close. I want you all to be thinking before we meet again in a couple weeks, what are the challenges that either you've encountered or you can anticipate encountering, and let us know, because we'll be responsive to that and we'll write information for you that will help you deal with those challenges. So unbelievably, that was question one. Let's back up and look at some more questions. Thank you. Okay. Let's see here. All right. And thank you for all these questions. We're going to kind of do some rapid fire ones here. And like I said at the beginning, we're not going to get to everything. It doesn't mean that your question go in a vacuum. We will answer them as we continue to have these programs. And of course, members, please remember, Tuesday mornings, you can sign up for a free 15-minute one-on-one session in the ASMP Legal and Business Clinic. And so all members have access to that at various degrees, but everyone can come at least once. And if you have questions that are specific, we can answer those in that forum as well. Okay, so this next question. If you use generative AI to change the faces of people in your shops, does that allow you to get around model releases? It's a really excellent question. And this question was actually first posed to me over a year ago by an ASMP member here in Dallas, where I am. And I thought it was a really excellent question then. And this is actually being brought up now by another photographer. And so want to address this real quickly. So there are two elements we always look at when we're thinking about rights that are in an image. And when we talk about model releases or talent releases, the element we're talking about are rights of publicity, right? The right that a person has to prevent their name, image, or likeness from being used in ways for commercial purposes and other sets of ways. The question's a good one, right? The question is, well, if I use AI to change someone's face, does that mean I don't have to then, have a model release, or am I otherwise getting around that? And the answer to that actually may be yes. The answer to that is also, that's not a good road to take. And here's why. The person depicted in the image has rights. And certainly if you're working with a paid model or talent, and so that's certainly if they're paid. Secondly, if they are in any part of an agency or a group, realize that what you're saying in this kind of idea is that it would be akin to someone taking your photograph that has your signature on it and crossing out your signature and changing a few things and selling it as their own so that they don't have to get around the problem of paying you. From a legal perspective, you are solving one problem, getting around a model release, but you're introducing a number of other problems. And those problems deal with right of publicity issues. Now, right of publicity is not a federal law. And the reason I say that is because there are only about 35 states that have right of publicity laws, and they're all different from state to state. So our advice to people in different states might even be different on this issue. So I'll back up a step and say this. You should be thinking about other parts of the creative chain, whether that's talent or whether that's graphic designers, or whether that's any other the hair makeup artists that you're associated with, or anything else. You should be thinking about all of these people as being all in this boat that we're in together as creatives, right? And realize that while something can possibly fix a problem in the way that we're talking about, it can introduce a whole host of other problems. And then from a bigger perspective, it introduces problems industry-wide. And so we've worked with sister organizations who are in those kind of ancillary areas, the talent agencies and others, to help them with these issues as well, because that's a good way for a photographer to get sued. And almost always the last thought I have at night before I fall asleep is, how can a photographer get sued and how can we prevent it from happening, right? I'm always thinking about that. This is one of those areas. It's one of those areas where technology is so far ahead of the law that there's a lot of danger there. And so the short answer to the question is yes, you can use AI to get around model releases or the requirement for model releases. The longer answer is we wouldn't ever recommend that for a whole host of different reasons. So good question. Good question. All right. So the next set of questions, and I think this is an absolutely appropriate question, is, and I appreciate you all asking this one. The next set of questions has to do with, well, what is generative AI to begin with, right? And sometimes we can get so focused in and Melanie and I spend hours a day reading about this stuff and how it affects the various parts of the industry. But there's another question that we saw from someone different, which talks about, generative AI and non-generative AI that are out there. So what are we talking about? Well, when we talk about artificial intelligence writ large, a lot of times what we're talking about is kind of machine learning and the type of conglomeration of information that comes from these various large language models that allow information to be created or organized or sorted in different ways. When we speak specifically about generative AI, what we're saying is that by using that background of information, that what they call training, and there's a reason we don't like to use the word training, but that background of information that was used to develop that model, the model is not copying something and making it based on what you are suggesting in a text prompt, but the model is creating something that's new. It's a new arrangement of pixels on the screen that have come from the library of learning that has taken place. But it's not like pulling a magazine out and making a photocopy. It's like having read every magazine in the world and then being an expert at being able to recall and draw something that fits the prompt, right? When we talk about generative AI, and this goes back to the copyright issue, when we talk about generative AI, there was never a question about a lot of the tools that that we talked about, whether something's eligible for copyright protection when we were talking about different tools in Photoshop, right? The clone stamp tool or other things like that. And let's get rid of Photoshop. Let's go back to the darkroom days and dodging and burning and changing parts of an image and adjusting things. But what you're doing in that case is you're adjusting the elements of the image that are already there. You're layering on top of those pixels something. You're using those pixels as a basis for something else. Generative AI creates something wholly new. It creates something that hasn't existed in that form before. Had those set of pixels have not existed before. And the danger there is that you, the photographer, are not the one creating those pixels. You are the one that may be directing the creation of it, but there's a machine through this machine learning algorithms and other large language model type backgrounds that are actually creating the images. That becomes an issue from the copyright standpoint and from everything we're talking about here. Because as Jaron pointed out, machine learning and AI, non-generative AI tools have been used by companies, hardware, software manufacturers, in lots of our parts of life for many, many years. And it was never this kind of uproar. The uproar now is because things are being created from whole cloth entirely by a computer. And then the question is, what does that mean for the photographers who created the work on which the machine was trained, for the photographers or the individuals who are using the output that comes out of this machine? How do you talk about these issues? That's what we talk about when we mean generative AI. Okay, let's see here. So as a follow-up, there's another question here I think is a really great one. So much of the discussion has been focused on generative AI. My question is about non-generative AI. With the proliferation of AI editing options, not generative, but performing tasks already done by photographers, do you have any thoughts on disclosing to your clients that you are no longer doing the work they're expecting and outsourcing it to AI? So I think that's a really thoughtful question. And one of the things that if you have come to these town halls in the past that I have tried to pride myself on is that I will give my best shot at answering most everything. Now, sometimes I will come back in a few weeks and I will refine my answer, but I'll say this. Non-generative AI tools, using machine learning technologies which help you perform tasks and functions that you were doing anyway in either a faster way or a different kind of way, I think are a positive to the photographer and the creator ecosystem. And I give you a great example of that. And it's a company that we work with, and we were introduced to their products a couple of years ago. They're in our member benefit hub. All members get discounts and all these things. You can go over to the member benefit hub, check it out. It's a company from Germany called Xire, Xcire. And Xire uses AI machine learning technology, not for editing, but for sorting and organizing and finding images. And I remember very clearly a moment about 18 months ago when, as I mentioned, I used to be a photographer a long, long time ago. And I have hard drives full of images many of which I don't remember taking. There's like millions of images, on these various hard drives. And I started looking into this company because it was something that Melanie and I were thinking about. ASMP, do we want to work with them? Are they a company that is in line with what ASMP stands for? And I pointed their software at these hard drives that I hadn't looked at for 5, 6, 10 years. And I was able to find images by just typing in a few words that I remembered in my recollection. And it brought images that I had taken, back in 1998 that I had scanned in, right? And it did that based on evaluating those images and putting it into what essentially is a micro, AI deep learning platform that has organized and sorted the images, not just by keywords, which has always happened, but by content and by feeling and mood and smile and people and all that stuff. It blew my mind. I remember very clearly that moment. Now, there are lots of other companies that do that. And so I don't want to say that this is the only one or the best one or anything else. The reason I bring them up is because that is a purpose-driven use of AI that is contained in a way that doesn't implicate these issues we're talking about with generative AI, makes the photographer's life easier, and allows them to be more productive and more creative and do more of the things that they want to do. I think all of us in this room have had that moment where you said, if I could just get out from behind this damn computer and go take pictures, I would be far more productive. Uses of AI, non-generative AI, that help photographers do that, I think are beneficial and positive as a general idea, right? As a general idea. Now, those things can cross the line. And we have definitely seen software that started out in one direction that has turned into something else, right? And you want to be aware of that as a photographer and what your pieces of software are doing. But going back to answer your question, do I think you have to disclose that when you're talking to a client? My answer is no. My answer is no, as long as what is being done is something that you could do yourself, given enough time and attention to, and it's not creating things that did not exist in the future or in reality. Here's an interesting example I'm just thinking of in my head, which is if I can go hire someone to do it, an intern or an employee or something, and I say, hey, go sort that and find me every picture where someone's smiling and they're on a beach and it's two people, and a machine learning algorithm is doing that, I think that has created more time in my day. And it hasn't gone against the core elements of what the client is hiring me for, right? The client is not hiring me for my organizational skills. They're hiring me for the output and the photography. And as long as I deliver that photography in a way that's protectable, and nothing we talked about here would not be protectable, I don't think that's something that has to be disclosed. Now, every photographer in every different genre can find different ways to solve that problem. But that's a really good question, and what I'm going to think about more. And again, in 2 weeks, I may have a slightly different answer for you. So, okay, let's see here. All right. So, obviously there are some questions here about, and we're going to just go another few minutes, and I wish I could stay all day with you guys, but we, as I mentioned, will continue. That's why we're doing these every 2 weeks. And we're going to have a lot of really, really exciting special guests coming up. I can't wait to talk to you about it. But one question here is, what if I'm making these like minimal changes on exposure and composition and crops and slight sharpening? Is this considered AI-like? This is where our line gets really fuzzy, right? And so remember what we all said back in the days of the digital revolution. And I straddled that line right between, film and digital. That was the period when I was coming up in photography. I studied at the Brooks Institute, and the first year and a half of my studies there were entirely film. You didn't do anything with the digital camera. And then the whole world shifted, and the last 2 years were entirely digital. And back then, we had these same kind of questions. And the question was, well, if I use Photoshop for this, is that, or what, am I doing something wrong? Does that fit into what we're talking about? And the mantra that we always said back then was something akin to, look, what you're doing here is a different way to do the same dodging and burning that we did in a darkroom, right? If those are the types of things, these kind of core elemental things that you're doing to an image that we've always done in one form or fashion with a variety of tools, there's a very strong argument to be made that those things are perfectly acceptable from a copyright and protectability and IP standpoint, because you are still getting to the same outcome. It's using the technology in ways that we've never been able to in the past that would change that calculus. There's also an element of kind of determining the personal ethos and and ethics that you have on some of these issues. But by and large, that's a lot of that's whether that's from my history or something else. A lot of the times I think about that in terms of, is this something that we could have historically done, even though the tool may look different? Are we getting to the same outcome? And if the answer is yes, then it falls in that category of an evolution of something rather than something entirely brand new. So, okay. So uh, let me see if there are any other questions that won't take 13 hours to answer, even though they all do. And that's not your fault. That's the fault of society and the fact that I like to talk a lot. Okay, so I want to end on this one, which is one that I think is going to lead us into our next discussion, as we introduce these new documents to the document library and new provisions and legal issues. And that is, the question is, how do you discover that they've ignored your no AI provision? And that is the question that we are asked each and every week. How do you discover when someone's stolen your work? How do you discover when you've been infringed? How do you know this or that? And the answer always comes down to two things. There are some tools out there that can help, right? And there are some tools that can help us learn when someone is violating a license or contracts or changing, infringing on your work. But 9 times out of 10, you're not going to know. And whenever a member comes and talks with us and says, hey, I found my work stolen and it was used here, the only thing I can guarantee in that scenario is that it has also been stolen and used 100 other places that you don't know about. And that happens for all of you. And so the question then becomes not how do we know when it happens, but when we know that it has happened, how have we protected ourselves so that we can do something about it, right? Because we will never be able to find all the places that have violated our contracts or agreements or provisions. What we can do, though, is set up our contracts and agreements and provisions to ensure that when we do determine that something like that has happened, that we have something we can do about it. That goes into copyright registration. That goes into the right clauses and provisions in a contract. And that goes into understanding your remedies. One thing that ASMP worked incredibly hard on for the better part of the decade was helping to get the CASE Act passed, which created the new CCB, Copyright Claims Board, the small claims tribunal for copyright infringement matters that are under $30,000. That is a resource that I can 100% guarantee every person in this room has been able to use because your work has been stolen. And I also can guarantee that 99% of you have not used it. So there are tools out there that we can use when we find those things. The trick is to know what they are and to know how to use them. And that's what we're here for. And that's what we're going to be helping with over these next many, many weeks and months. We will get the information for the next town hall out in the next week or so. We hope you register. We hope you come again. This will be on YouTube. This will be on the websites. Send in questions. We want to answer them. We're going to have such an incredible array of industry experts joining us for this. And I definitely want to thank each and every one of you for coming today. Thank Jaron and thank PetaPixel for their support as we launch in on this. And we can't wait to show you some of the things that we have in the works, talk to you more about our advocacy work, talk to you about all the cool member stuff that's happening, and want to thank you all for coming today. So with that, I will say goodbye, and I hope everyone learned at least one thing. That's always my goal. If you can leave here having learned one thing from today, then it's a valuable adventure. because the entry cost today was free. So hopefully one thing makes you feel good about it. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. We'll get this up and we'll send you some emails with some more information, and we'll talk soon. Bye now.